That's what editing's for.
Yeah.
Welcome to Never Enough Gaming. This is episode 18. Today I got Danny with me. We're talking about Shenmue. That's how you say it, right?
That's how I say it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Good enough. So how'd you get into this game? Like, how'd you find it?
Yeah, man, this is probably one of the, maybe the very first game that I, really followed in the magazines. Because I remember it was, super hyped, right?
Did you have a Dreamcast?
Yeah. So,
cool.
Released in, November of 2000 in North America, if I remember correctly. And it had been out for, almost a year in Japan prior to that. So, all the information in the magazines, following it online at that time. I didn't get it, launch. I was in junior high, elementary, roughly around there. But I did get it just a few months after. And I remember that game left such an impact on me. I remember very specific things about the day I went to go get that game, and I got it at a Best Buy. Just I remember the weather that day. I remember the time of the day I went to go get it. There was just something very uniquely special about, everything when it comes to that game and my relationship with it. And I think that kind of is a testament to a lot of the fans of that game kind of feel the same way, especially people who experienced it when it did launch and just how big of an impression it left on so many people. And everybody has a pretty cool story about it. But
yeah, I bet even now, in 2024, there's stuff in this game that impresses the hell out of me. A lot of people, I've heard people say it's aged pretty bad, but I really don't think so. This game looks better than most PS2 games I've been playing. 90% of them.
Sure. Yeah, and that was one of the great things about the Dreamcast. Even looking back on it today, for me specifically, I was old enough to really kind of grasp the concept that yes, this console, it doesn't have, a lot of those first-person narrative, really strong, in-depth games that the PS1 offered. It didn't really have the strength of the multiplayer that the Nintendo 64 offered, but, the Dreamcast really offered, this crazy, just genuinely artistic expression that neither of those two options did offer. And,
right.
Shenmue definitely falls into that category, right? But beyond that, just the games at that time in my mind stand out for looking so good and just so vibrant. Obviously Shenmue is not the only example of that, but there's just so many great impressions that system left. And yes, kind of like you said, the overall aesthetic of a lot of those games and just how they look technically, I don't think it's a question that it did outperform the PS2 as far as visuals are concerned. But obviously, back at that time, 2000, 2001, 2, and so on and so forth, that really wasn't the absolute end all be all for gamers. But yeah, man, that game looked incredible then and now. Obviously, yeah, I think you could make the argument that it is a product of its time, and it was doing a lot of things back then that really no other game was doing, and it really left a huge impact on gaming moving forward.
My wife came in when I was playing it, and she saw the character models' faces, and she was like, that actually looks pretty good.
Yeah.
And she walked in earlier, and I was playing the first Splinter Cell, and that looked horrible.
So if I understand correctly, that you played it for the first time recently, yeah?
Yeah, I'm still not done with the first game.
Okay.
I'm a little over halfway. About halfway. But I hope the other two play like this one, do they?
So yeah, the second one for sure. The second one was in production roughly the same time as the first one, at least a portion of the game. So those two games play seamlessly the same then and now. But as I'm sure you heard, if you have any, if you had read about it at all, Shenmue 3 is kind of in its own category, and for better or for worse. So
it's extrememely good.
Yeah.
What do you think of it? Do you like it?
What do I think of Shenmue 3?
Yeah.
So it's hard for me, right? We're talking about somebody that lived through the first two games as they came out and really grasped the importance and Shenmue is one of those games that It's this rare work of art that simultaneously it's beloved, it's hated, it's misunderstood, it's highly regarded, but yet at the same time it's fiercely a product of its time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you get it, right, if you got it back then, like you got it and you really appreciated the aesthetic and like all these things it was trying to accomplish, and it really was like, at least for me, like a gamer's game. And it's hard for me to look at Shenmue 3 without being like nostalgic based of the first two games. And how can you ever live up to that hype of like,
right,
19 years separated or whatever it was? Because you can't make the same game. You can't create the same level of feeling, right? Because like I'm not 14 anymore, right? Like I'm not playing this game in my 14-year-old bedroom at my mom and dad's house in the early winter months of 2001 or whatever it was. I do remember when they announced it, like at the E3, I think it was, like Shenmue 3, and just like after so many years of like the rumors and the letdowns, and then it's like they announced it, right? Like every other massive fan of that game, like you almost didn't believe it, that it was actually happening. And it still didn't happen for a couple more years after the announcement, right? But to answer your question, like for what it's worth, yeah, like I didn't hate that game as much as everybody else hated it because I kind of took it for what it was, right? Like I was going to enjoy this journey and it was going to further progress the story regardless if it didn't do it much, but I enjoyed it for what it was.
Yeah, I know someone else who's a diehard Shenmue fan and grew up with it, and they said pretty much the same thing about 3. They like it for what it is. I just love how much detail is in this damn game. It blows my mind the way you can just examine everything. Even if there's like, I mean, most things might have a little thing in it that'll have some like story flavoring,
Yeah, absolutely, man. And just, even something that I say today, like if we got, GTA 6 impending in the next year or two, right? Like whenever I play those massive open world games, I'm always thinking to myself, like, there's such a level of artistic, ingenuity in these games, right? Like how detailed the city is, like how detailed, like just the NPCs are. And a lot of that, I would say most of that, comes from Shenmue. And looking at Shenmue today, 20 some years later, right? Like I can see a GTA 6 and I can think like, yeah, dude, like this is kind of where this idea comes from, just on a much grander scale. And sometimes I can get caught up in that world, even playing Shenmue today, right? Like sometimes it's just like fun in a creepy way to follow around an NPC and just like watch their daily routine. But I mean, back then, like I said, there just was no other game that delivered that, like you said, amount of detail. And like everybody had their own schedule, right? Like people went to and from their houses or their stores and then went back to the house. There was the night and the day cycle, the time and the calendar cycle, the weather cycle that was accurate from 1986. I don't know if that's like, if those were things that you had researched prior, but
yeah, I know. Like I think the remaster adds that mode.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool, like in a kind of a stupid way, because like who would care about that level of detail? You know what I mean? But when you look at it from like when you look at it kind of from a like an artistic angle, you're like, that is like a really sweet touch. Not that it has any real like bearing on the game itself, but it is.
And it's a little mix up for you to give another playthrough in.
Yeah, for sure.
Change it up a little bit.
For sure.
On regular mode, are the weather cycles, are they random?
So maybe a little bit. I mean, to be honest, it's not going to be something that affects your gameplay, obviously, but
yeah,
it is like obviously something that you notice, right? Like as you're going about your day and you're going out in town and stuff. But yeah, I believe random, unless somebody else can jam me up in the comments about it not being.
Yeah, at first when I played this game, I was like super overwhelmed with it. Like even in the beginning, it took me forever to figure out how to walk through this house.
Yeah.
I was playing with mouse and keyboard at first, but then I switched to a controller. But it was still a little weird.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of, as much as I love the Dreamcast, like, I kind of hate that controller, like, for a lot of different reasons, and specifically, games of that time, it was, kind of appropriate. But if we look back at time, dude, like, nobody really did it better than the PlayStation controller, like, for 3D environment games,
Oh, yeah.
And
I mean, like, playing a first-person shooter or anything right there with the camera on the GameCube is so weird.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a perfect example. Like, Nintendo kind of shoots themselves in the foot a lot, like, with their creativity, It's like, yeah, man, this is wild, this is cool, but it's really only going to attract a certain demographic,
Like their new cardboard for the Switch.
Yeah. Whatever. I remember that when it was around for like a week.
Yeah. But also with figuring out movement, when I first got into the challenge of this game, and even with your house, I was like, I'm never going to figure this shit out. But, after playing for just a couple in-game days, you get it down.
Yeah. It's almost like you could almost compare it to like a less rigid tank control in a way.
Yeah.
But
it feels a little more free than that.
Yeah.
Than a tank control.
Especially if you're playing it in 2024, you know what I mean? Because you have certain expectations at this stage in gaming, right? So I can just imagine like how frustrating that could have been.
Right. I think it might have helped that, like, I think just a few episodes ago we did Resident Evil, the original. So
okay,
I had to deal with those controls, and then coming to Shenmue, it's actually a little better.
You know what, man? Like, because Resident Evil is another series, especially like that original PS1 trilogy. I was never put off by tank controls, and like even
Me neither.
I remember playing those games. Like I played Resident Evil 2 at a birthday party in the fall of like 1998. Like I remember very specifically. That's like another game that I have like very specific memories of. And of all the things that I remember about that evening and like who I was playing with and what our reactions were, at no point in time did it ever come up that like, hey, these are fucking weird controls, Like that was never a thought in our mind at that time.
Yeah, because you don't give a fuck about controls.
You adapt to them if that's what you have, you know what I mean? Like, we didn't have hindsight of like X amount of decades of gaming behind us to really care or complain about it.
Yeah. Now if the game has even remotely bad controls, it gets panned.
Yeah, dude, absolutely.
Yeah. It's sad.
It is what it is. People have their preferences, and I've always told people, like, unironically, if Capcom was to, they're kind of teasing. I can never keep up with the news, but they're kind of teasing another remake of Resident Evil 1, which is like,
yeah. I mean, that's inevitable. It's going to come.
Has there ever been a game that's received 2 remakes?
Yeah, it's a remake of the remake.
Right. But I've always said unironically to like other Resident Evil fans, like I would be stoked if Capcom, for whatever reason, was like, hey, we're going to make a game in the Resident Evil series with tank controls. And like
that would be really cool, but
I know that it would be like career suicide probably, like, but I don't know, like there's such a massive charm to those like fixed camera angle tank control games.
I mean, they try to put in the old tank controls in the remakes, but it doesn't have the same feeling without the fixed camera angles.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to discredit, like obviously Capcom's just been knocking it out of the park the last couple of years. Like 7, 8, 7 specifically, I thought was just like a fantastic game that that honestly could have been called anything other than Resident Evil and would have been fine.
Mm-hmm.
Which I would assume that's probably what happened at some point. But
it really feels like it.
7 was great. 8 was good, right? The remake of 2 was phenomenal because RE2 is, for me, the original's top 3 games of all time. And you can just
I
tell.
played the remake, but I never played the original.
Really?
Yeah, the original's coming up actually in a few days.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've been playing it. It's amazing. I had Resident Evil 2 on the 64 when I was a kid, and I don't really remember playing it because my parents realized that they got me.
I can't.
They took that shit.
I can't imagine that being like. I'm trying to think of an unbalanced metaphor for that, but yeah, as a kid getting Resident Evil 2, but you got it for the Nintendo 64.
Right.
That would be like getting that Mario game for the Philips CDI or whatever it was instead of something on the Super Nintendo or whatever.
Is it that bad of a port?
I mean, dude, it's such... Resident Evil fandom is so... Not strange, because I get it, but you can definitely tell when you have fans before Resident Evil 4 and fans after Resident Evil 4. That's basically the dividing line. And anybody who's a fan after Resident Evil 4 it's one of a few different factors, right? Like they say RE5 is one of the best games in the series. RE6 is one of the best games in the series. And at that point, I just tune those people out because I really kind of don't have any opinion positive of those games.
I enjoy 5 and 6 as co-op games, but not Resident Evil games.
Exactly. And I just look at 6 as such a train wreck of ideas. Let's throw everything we possibly can against the wall.
I mean, they throw in every enemy type, and it's just for no reason. The only thought was actually pretty decent gameplay was some of Leon's campaign.
Yeah, but obviously, Leon, they try to give the I don't know how to say this, the original Resident Evil fans are gonna love Leon's campaign.
Yeah,
it's the zombies.
They even gave the T-virus zombies.
Yeah, but let's give Chris these weird grasshopper characters, and
yeah, Chris gets a buddy cop thing.
Yeah.
And of course, he's riddled with PTSD, and it's so weird.
And by that entry, the story made just zero sense, and I think once you eliminated Wesker from the lore, right? You kind of didn't really have anything to anticipate or fight against, or really what are we doing here? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like they got rid of Wesker. And then there's well, what now? He had a son. That's what it is.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
Shall we get into the story?
Yeah, please.
This is going to be awful because I'm going to have to say these names. So, you are Ryo Hazuki.
Yeah.
And it opens up on you heading home. And it's a nice, beautiful, snowy background. The snow looks excellent. This whole intro looks fantastic. And what's cool is it's the same graphics you're going to get in gameplay.
Yeah.
So nothing really changes. And there's an injured old lady, and she says, your father's in trouble. So you head to your dojo, and Fukuhara, that's his name, right?
Yeah, Fukusan.
Yeah, Fukusan. He gets knocked through the door, and inside is Lan Di. And he's a guy with a villain with a scar, and he's talking to your father. He asks your father where the mirror is, and, he's not giving that up. And then they start fighting. He takes down both of you, and he says, hand over the mirror or we'll kill you. So he tells him where it is. It's buried under the cherry tree. Then he asked your father if you remember someone named Zhao Sun Ming, the man apparently your father killed in Maine-Coon. I hope I said all that right.
You should be a localizer for somebody.
Sweet. Yeah. Thank you. And he tells your father to get up and die like a warrior and defeats him. And his men, which are some men in black type people, they bring him the mirror, which he also gives a close up of a tattoo he has of it as well. And you hold your father in the arms, dying, and he tells you to keep your friends and family close that he dies. And you yell out a beautiful "No!"
Fade to black.
Fade to black. What do you think of this intro?
Yeah, man. Just like really good, like really sets the stage for that revenge story that it is, you know? Like
Right.
immediately what it is that you're getting into. It immediately sets up this enemy that is, you know, light years beyond you as far in terms of like martial arts or whatever. So it's like it's a familiar story, right? It's easy to follow. We know what we have to do. But what you don't know as a first-time player is like, okay, now what happens in the gameplay? Because you think that you're just going to go start fighting people, right?
Yeah.
And that couldn't be further from the truth. But that,
Yeah, I mean, it can take a long time till you get to your real fight.
Yeah.
You don't count the QTs.
So that intro, and here's just like something I've always thought was interesting. Are you aware, or did you ever watch the anime that they released for Shenmue not too long ago?
No, I saw they had one, and I like anime, so I plan on watching it after I play through it.
So here's like, if you had played the first two games, right, which is basically what the anime covers. So I guess you can base that upon whether or not you want to watch it before or after you play the first two games. But one minor detail that I thought was like super like fan friendly was watching that cutscene over the years after playing that game for a million times. I always kind of wondered like, why is Ryo running home, right? Like, where is he coming from? Why is there this sense of like urgency, right? And in the anime, it shows that he was at a martial arts tournament, like he's in martial arts in high school, and he's like running home from the tournament, which obviously is not mentioned in the game in any way.
I kind of wish it would have.
Yeah, but it was just like a really cool little like, hey, here's where he was coming from, and now you know after 25 years or, you know, whatever the case was, 20 years.
It's just a nice little answer to have.
Yeah.
That's cool. So it cuts to 4 days later, and you're sleeping and you're having nightmares about your father's murderer. Ine? I think that's her name.
Yeah.
It's the old lady there.
Ine-san.
Ine-san. She gives you your allowance for the day, which is, is it 2,000 something?
That sounds right, yeah.
I think, yeah. And you get that every morning when you wake up. And you need to go see Fukuhara. Time to move around and navigate your house.
Which, yeah, man, that's another thing I kind of distinctly remember when I first played the game. Kind of like you said earlier, like kind of getting used to the controlling and how you navigate and stuff like that. But that's really where I'm looking at like level of detail in this game. You know, like you're able to open drawers in your room. You're able to like open
And you
cabinets.
get rewarded for it, too.
Yeah, like open cabinets in the kitchen. I found the Sega Saturn, which is like awesome, but at the same time, it's 1986. So like, what is happening? You know?
Yeah.
But, and yeah, to say those things in 2024 and to be like, man, it was so cool that I could pick up this apple and like examine it sounds so ridiculous. But again,
Yeah, I mean, that's stuff that's used to high effect and like, you know, Heavy Rain or the Until Dawn, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it felt like that because you actually have to pick up stuff, move your hand around, examine them. Even when you go browsing in a store.
Yeah.
It really doesn't take you away from control that much.
And it makes you, you know, in your first playthrough, obviously, which I kind of remember, but just like, okay, here's all this stuff at this store. Am I going to need to buy these items? Are they going to like play some sort of role later on? And you realize that like, no, like 1% of items that you actually can get in the game only affect the story. The other 99% have no bearing whatsoever outside of just to be like, hey, I bought this chocolate bar or whatever this is at the store, and it really has no purpose, but I have it. So that's cool.
Yeah. Another awesome thing is, well, actually, I'll get to that when we actually get to the town. So we need to go see Fukuhara, and yeah, I took this time to navigate my house, and at first I was just going through random doors, and then I got even more confused and lost. So I saved the game right when I woke up, and I took that time to explore the whole house. Because at the beginning, I was really pressured for time. I was, I'm having the same issue with Majora's Mask, but any time to get, I'm just like, I feel pressured. Like, with this and Majora's Mask, I learned that it does not matter. We have plenty of time for everything.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there will be times where I'm sitting outside of a store waiting for it, though.
Yeah, so
the cool thing about that is you can, like, talk to civilians and, like, citizens, and they might not have something useful to say, but it will be something just flavorful. Like you're having a nice little conversation.
And that's one of the great things about the game was that I've always said is, for the most part, if you've played it once, you kind of remember the pattern, right? Like, I need to talk to this person. I need to go do this. I need to talk to this person. And then, the story branches from there, but you don't necessarily have to take the same path every single time. You can arrive at the same conclusion by doing slightly different things. And I thought that was like a really nice touch to be able to acknowledge that as I was playing it. And yeah, to your credit, just like the depth of the voice acting team, and obviously when we talk about Shenmue, you can't skip the fact that the voice acting is just so awkward, for like lack of a better term, obviously, just like many games from Sega.
It's better than Resident Evil.
Yeah. And that's for a variety of factors, but to a degree, that's kind of what makes the game so memorable. It's like you ask this regular looking person a otherwise standard question, and they just kind of start shouting at you, and you can't help but like laugh at the absurdity of all of it. And okay.
And some people just feel like, why are you talking to me?
Yeah. Sorry, I can't talk right now. Ask somebody else.
Yeah. And also with that, what's cool is your main objective is like if you have to track someone down or whatever, there's always, well, maybe not always, a lot of the time more than one way to go about it.
Absolutely.
Like you can get your clues from this specific person or this person. I one time accidentally wandered in to the right place or a side thing, which is, that happens in Yakuza a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, this definitely reminded me of Yakuza. But like you said at the beginning, it throws you into it. You get your goal right away. Even Yakuza takes a few hours to even get your overall goal. And some of them.
That's what's great.
Looking at you, Yakuza 3.
And I know we kind of briefly spoke about that before, because I'm also a huge Yakuza fan, and it's really been cool to see how that franchise has grown, and kind of took on a life of its own. And it's just in the last couple of years that we started getting like the memes and everything, so it's kind of bigger than it ever was. But
yeah,
it's kind of funny playing those games today, like, for instance, I just a couple months ago got into the newest one, Infinite Wealth, right? And I play those games the exact same way every single time. And we're talking like all the Yakuza games, all the Judgment games. As soon as you're given like free reign to go out and play the game, I'm leveling up, right? I'm leveling up as soon as I can. I'm upgrading all the things I can as I upgrade. I'm playing the arcade games. I'm doing as many side quests as I can. That to me is just how I've always played those games. And like, it's funny at this point because whenever you do get like a side quest, it's going to end up in a battle. You're going to have to fight somebody. So the dialogue doesn't even really matter. So I'm just like skipping through that. Okay, where's the battle at?
Yeah. It also helps that everyone has a voice in this game. Like, I don't think there's any just subtitles, is there?
In Shenmue?
Yeah, like I think everyone has a voice.
Yeah, everybody has a voice.
Yeah.
There are subtitles, obviously, that are optional. Or I know, like, pro players love playing it with, like, the original Japanese voice actors with the English subtitles. But, you know,
I was thinking about actually doing that.
Yeah, whatever your preference is.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, the English voice acting isn't like horrible, but I know for a fact Japanese is going to sound better.
Yeah, dude. If you ever listen to so the English voice actor who voices Yo is this guy named Corey Marshall, I think. And in the last probably 10 years or so, he's become more prevalent on YouTube and stuff like that, largely due to like the Shenmue community. And just his experience with going to, you know, the studio in Japan and doing the voice acting, and just what his experience was like that, and why it turned out, you know, so jarring like it did in the game. And just to be able to get somebody's firsthand reaction to that. Like, I would love to talk to like just some random NPC's voice actor from Shenmue, just to get like, what was your experience doing the dialogue for this game, and like, what was it like being in that vocal booth, you know?
Yeah, that would be awesome input. I wonder how hard it would be to get like interview someone like that.
I mean, we're talking about a game now that's 20, 25 years old plus. So we got to morbidly consider that some of those people are probably no longer with us, but
right.
I'm sure, yeah, you know, I'm sure it's possible.
So also when you're like walking around your house, I know you can find 2 move scrolls, technique scrolls. I found one in like a wicker basket. I don't know where the other one is.
So yeah, one's in Fukusan's room, and then one's in Iwau's room, I think.
Okay, it's in Fukusan's room. That's the one I didn't get.
Yeah, it's either like in his desk or it's on the wall, something like that.
I'm gonna get that. And you can get like little scenes here if you examine certain things, little flashbacks with your father.
Yeah.
If you go to the dinner table and look at the food, you have a scene with you having dinner with your father, and he's teaching you, you know, the importance of vegetables. It's nice little scenes. Then you head outside, and under the cherry tree, you have another flashback, and he's teaching you martial arts. I think all these flashbacks are pretty much giving you a lesson.
Yeah, and as I think about these, I'm trying to remember, but I'm pretty sure that both young Ryo and your dad are always in your martial arts gi, which is like somewhat comical
Always.
to me. Like, did Iwao ever wear anything other than a gi at any point in his life? And did Yo at any point in time wear anything other than a gi before he got to high school?
It's a good question.
Or are you just
think about that?
You're just constantly sparring throughout your childhood?
I mean, they seem pretty comfortable. You go to the dojo, and Fukuhara is there, and you ask him about what happened. He says he doesn't really know or remember anything, and he begs you not to go after Land D. But, you know, you need to do this for your father. Revenge. And here you can examine the banner for another flashback, the dojo sign. And you were in a fight in school, and your father teaches you about friendship. Now it's time to head to town. And the first thing you do is run into Megumi, who's a little girl, and she has a kitten. And this is the kind of stuff I love in this game. And she tells you about a car that ran over the kitten's mother, and it's the same black car that Landy was in. You did see this car back in the beginning cutscene, and that's your only clue. And the kitten's hungry, and you have to choose between tofu or dried fish. And from what I understand, you get like a little dialogue change for depending on what you pick. But you know, that's pretty cool.
I always give the cat tofu because I
gave it dried fish.
I hate this little cutscene having to play through the game every single time.
You know, I didn't think about that. I bet it would kind of be annoying.
It's like
one thing that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's just like, you know, you kind of get this open landscape, and you're like, man, this game's about to open up. But first, let's deal with this annoying kid and her stupid cat.
Yo. Then she tells you about Yamagishi. I don't know how to say his name.
Yamagishi-san.
Yeah. And he almost got hit by a car. So we can go head there and get some information. But first you get stopped by an old lady who's looking for a specific house. And you tell her to go wait at the park while we find it for her. So, I went ahead and did this. And she thanks you for being a kind young man. You don't get anything. It's just being a good person.
Which is so funny because, that's how we think of it. Like, there's no reward for this at all.
Right? You're not going to give me any money.
I guess you get, an achievement if you're playing,
Yeah, you're like a Boy Scout or something.
But yeah, that's one of those things, man. It's like when I play these games, like I said, I always play Shenmue virtually the exact same way, right? Like, I know I got to do this, this, and this. I always help that old lady. I always buy, certain items that I don't need to buy,
Yeah, I bought all the scrolls immediately. Yeah. Should I have done that?
But yeah, you help this old woman, and there is no reward for that whatsoever, just like in real life. So,
right,
she's going to try to give you a check or something like that, which, who takes checks anymore?
I would. Also, another thing with the no-skipping cutscenes, that can be really annoying.
Yeah.
If you, keep failing a battle.
Oh, dude. Yeah, don't.
With a quick time event.
You know what? And that's another great example of how, the game was a product of its time and in a lot of ways was very just brutally unforgiving. The remasters kind of resolve some of that because you can save it in other places other than your bedroom, I'm pretty sure. But
yeah, you can.
Thinking back to when I played on the Dreamcast, that you could only save it in the bedroom, right? And you could only. It's not like you could just, kind of like you said, if you failed something, you had to go back. And I think
say that you have to go back to your bedroom.
Yeah, so I think, man, because it's been so long, but I think if you failed something enough times, the game would acknowledge that and kind of give you a break and kind of let you start doing things further to the source instead of starting back at your bedroom every time. But
that's nice.
Yeah, especially I remember. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I remember when you first get the job at the harbor, and I was thinking that you were going to have to leave your house and walk to the bus stop to get the bus ride to the harbor. I thought you were going to have to do that every single morning as I was playing the game, but then eventually it starts giving you that quick time option to skip ahead and just be at work.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was in the original.
Yeah.
Even leaving your house and fast traveling to certain city parts.
Yeah. It is.
Cool. Yeah. So at this point, we go to Yamagishi and he tells you the black car headed for Dobita? Dobita. Yeah. And at this point, I went back home because I found out about those 2 scrolls that I missed. I was like, well, I don't want to miss them. And I went back to the dojo and did some practicing. And anytime you have to practice, it's so confusing. At first, at least.
Yeah, just with the way the game explains the combat is not great because it's they're trying to do that within dialogue, with the characters to where it'll say as you shift your weight forward, kick or whatever. So you're so am I moving forward and then am I kicking, or am I kicking as I'm moving forward?
Yep.
And I remember that being a very
I was stuck in that park with the old man for a little bit.
Yeah, dude. And not to again jump too far ahead, but in the second game it gets even worse.
Awesome.
Because it almost becomes more cryptic, I feel, which it's fine now that I've completed the games X amount of years ago, but dude, there's this part in the second game where you got to catch leaves from a tree, and I think that might have been the source of my first ever like rage quit, you know?
Catching leaves from a tree?
Yes.
That sounds great. I can't wait.
Yeah.
So you go to Dabuita. Yeah. This place messed me up for a while. This is the place I was like, there's just no way I'm going to remember any of this shit.
Yeah.
But I did at least eventually. It actually kind of surprised me. The layout's pretty simple. There's just a lot in it. Kind of like, the Yakuza games.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's more alive than the Yakuza games. At least some of them. Because a lot of the civilians in those games just kind of fade in and fade out.
Yeah.
And
like they walk off to that like area that you can't get to.
Yeah. And then a lot of them will disappear if you turn your camera.
Yeah, that too.
They do that trick too.
Or in Shenmue, I feel like this isn't all the time, but like if you watch an NPC walk into a building and then you go into the building, like sometimes they'll be in that building, which is again one of those like artistic, if you will, artistic touches.
Yeah, I noticed that for the first time when I went to a store and someone was in there shopping that was outside.
Yeah.
I was like, that's pretty cool.
Which, like, real quick, shout out to Dabuita. I know, like, the Shenmue mega fans have, like, done that pilgrimage. People have, like, gone to Dabuita. I actually was in Japan a couple years ago, and my friend took me to Dabuita out there, which is, like, the best way I can describe it, it almost feels like you're in San Francisco. There's a Japanese naval base, and then there's a American naval base. And so there's like all these Americanized looking sports bars. So as I'm walking down the street, I'm looking, we go into these bars and we're walking down the street and I'm like, this just feels like California. Like
That's crazy.
I was seeing American military like in uniform walking around and they're seeing me and they're like, who the fuck is this guy? Like how is this guy here? But yeah, cool place. If anybody ever makes it out there, man, it's a super cool place.
Yeah, I got lost as hell here. There's, I don't know, 30 different places to go to, it feels like.
Yeah, so, like, there's probably, I don't know, what do you think, like 5 or 6 restaurants?
Yeah.
And then there's, like, the casino, the 2 bars, or the 3 bars. And then you have Nagai Industries, the barber shops.
You got an empty parking lot. You got
the arcade.
Yeah, the park. There is a park there, right?
Yeah, where you meet that old man in the park and he shows you that move.
Right. And there's just, little stalls selling stuff and jacket stores.
Obviously, yeah, man, like the arcade is what comes to mind and kind of going there. And as a kid, recognizing like, oh, these are like emulated games that I can play within Shenmue. And just thinking like that was such a cool thing. Like that's where I spent all, Ine-san's allowance that she gave me was just at the arcade playing those same like Space Harrier and then like the QTE game, which is like so dumb, but it's available. So I played it.
Right.
But yeah, just like a living city within a video game. And that was just such a unique thing at that time.
Very unique. I mean, even today's standards, it's a little unique. The way they go about it.
Yeah. I had read that like in early development of the game, when they were like trying to debug it, there was an issue with like too many people trying to get in and out of the tomato convenience store, and they would get stuck like inside the store, so you couldn't get in, or if you did get in, you couldn't move because everybody was just like stuck in there.
Damn.
Which is just such like a funny reality, I guess.
I wonder how many people got in there.
So I think if you're playing the game, obviously like now, it can only ever be you the cashier, and like one other person. I don't think any more than 3 people can be in there at the same time. And if you
Yeah, I
look
don't think I've ever seen more than like one customer in a place.
if you look at the other businesses like we're talking about, you know, the arcade, the restaurants, typically in the arcade, it's only ever you, the employee, and then those 2 Mad Angels that are sitting down at that tabletop arcade. So they're like in that fixed position, right? So there usually is only ever one other NPC, unless if you're in the casino, I feel like there can be more.
Actually, I think so. Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time in there.
Yeah, that place is a little bit bigger than most of the other businesses.
Yeah, there's like multiple floors too.
Yeah.
I spent an unnecessary amount of time on the slots. So I went to the flower shop, and you meet Nozomi?
Yeah.
Is that it? Yeah.
Bay.
And this is like your love interest.
That's Bay.
Yeah. And she just tells you to cheer up. Like, yeah, cheer up. Get over it. It's been 4 days, man. Get it together.
Yeah.
And she says someone named Tom might have some more info. You know, you get all these names, and it's kind of jarring when you get to someone named like Tom or Charlie.
And then you meet Tom, and you can never forget him.
Yeah, he's a little strange.
How Tom has never ended up like as a hidden character, like in a Virtua Fighter or something Sega related, has just blown my mind. And I guess one thing I wanted to say earlier was like, there's so many characters in this game and this franchise, and Ryo's the only one that's ever been represented outside of the game. I'm pretty sure. Like, how crazy would it be if we would get like Fukusan and like the next Smash Brothers as like a trophy, or like, you know, just like a hidden little something, you know?
I mean, why not? I mean, there's already a Sega relationship there.
Yeah. I mean...
And they pulled trophies from more obscure games.
Yeah.
For sure.
I also...
Old Tom Johnson is an interesting man.
Yeah, dude. Hot dog salesman extraordinaire.
Oh, yeah. And never stops dancing. And he had some words with Dan Lee because he was threatening one of his customers.
So he gave him a piece of his mind.
Yeah, piece of his mind. And he tells us to ask the Chinese about the Chinese. At this point, I went home because it was getting late, and I ran into
Ine-san.
And she's Ine, and she gave me the info about a Chinese couple that goes to that visits a certain restaurant, and this is where I got my clue from. But from what I understand, there's quite a few places you can get this information from.
Yeah.
Yep. Then I went to bed and started day 2.
So just curious, like with your first impressions of the game, playing it today, by this point, do you feel like you kind of had a grasp of what the game was going to be like?
Yeah, I think I did.
Because at this point in time, you haven't had a single battle, right?
And that's fine with me. Like, I'm here for the story. I mean, like, I play anything from Call of Duty, the visual novels, so...
And I think
if there's a big break between the action, that's completely fine to me. I know that kind of irks some people, because I hear some people say this game's a little too slow, but I love it for that.
I would say the majority of people kind of get hung up on exactly the thing that you're talking about. And I'm like you, where even today, with immediate, like unlimited resource of games, whether it be, like a Call of Duty, a Fortnite, whatever it may be, like, give me Alan Wake 2. Let me play that game, because this game is going to offer me a story that comes along like once every 5-10 years. You know what I mean?
It's that good, huh?
Yeah. And Shenmue.
I played Alan Wake 1 in Control, so I need to play 2.
Oh, and that's, like most people, I don't know if I'd say most people, because by now Remedy has been kind of observed as like a top tier, gaming company.
Definitely.
But if you've played Control, getting to play Alan Wake 2 and having that, knowledge, you have such a richer experience just with the little pieces they drop in here and there. And I said the same thing about Control. If you'd played Alan Wake, I remember as I'm playing Control, I had no idea that there was going to be these little hints of Alan Wake here and there. And as I'm playing
that was a nice, pleasant surprise for you then.
Yeah, as I'm playing it, I'm like, why are they talking about Bright Falls? What does that have to do with it? And then it opens up and you're like, Jesus.
Yeah.
I can't think of another. I just said this the other day. I can't think of another gaming company that has created a shared universe, unless maybe Konami kind of did that with Metal Gear a little bit, but they mostly they mostly reference older Metal Gear stuff or other Konami stuff. But and I guess you can make the claim Capcom does it with their Marvel vs. series or whatever. But I mean,
the last Marvel vs. Capcom game was 2016, I think, 15.
Yeah, with the way the Control does it and the way that Alan Wake 2 continues that narrative is just so. It really is a special game.
I think there's even a link with Quantum Break too.
There is, yeah. So the main character from Quantum Break voices a character and has his likeness after a character in Alan Wake 2.
That's cool.
So yeah, and dude, I don't know if have you played Alan Wake 2 yet?
No.
There's just I won't spoil it for you, but there's just some insanely creative moments in that game that are worth you finding out by playing it. And I feel once you do play it, you'll completely understand what I mean. Just they really took a chance with that game because I feel you can't take many chances with modern games anymore. AAA,
especially how much money they put into them.
Yeah, AAA modern games. You can't afford to take risks like you could in 2000 with the Dreamcast by any stretch of the imagination. You got to recoup your money. You got to have X amount of sales. You got to appeal to whatever demographic. You got to have cross advertisement. In Alan Wake 2, we're talking about a game that originally came out in 2008 or something like that. So it's been, 15 years at this point. But
yeah,
you can just tell the amount of love that Remedy has for that franchise. And they kept it alive any way they could. And I can't I know I've read some of the criticism for Alan Wake 2, and I can understand to a degree, but I just feel they could not have made a better game than what they did.
And also with Shenmue, at the time, it was the most expensive game ever made. If I'm correct, right?
Yeah, and I feel those numbers have probably been exaggerated to some degree, and they've changed over the years.
Right.
But yeah, which that's another
ambitious as hell, being so expensive too.
Oh, 100%, man. And that's another thing when it comes to this game specifically. It's like a dichotomy because if you love Shenmue, right, chances are that you love the Sega Dreamcast. Because how can you not be aware of the other,
I think this is only my second Dreamcast game.
So with that, it's strange because if you've loved those things long enough, you understand that one really hurt the other, right? I think there's been that rumor forever where it was said that the only way for Shenmue to have ever turned a profit was if everybody who bought it three copies or whatever, which I don't know if that was an accurate metaphor, but yeah, they've said that there was no way for this game to ever recoup its investment. And looking at it now, it's yeah, dude, I love Shenmue, but it kind of tanked, or it helped tank Sega as a whole. It wasn't the only reason. There was several other reasons, but the X amount of millions of dollars that it invested into this one game didn't help either, No,
not at all. And I think they sold it for a little bit of a higher price than normal too. mistake. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it was one of those. It's interesting to look back at like the ambition that Yu Suzuki had with it. I think he said that it was going to be one of 7 or one of 8, one of many games in the series, right?
Yeah, he had quite the story planned.
And I just love thinking about how like bold of a statement that is, because nobody ever considers like, okay, so 1 and 2 were slated to come out and did come out on the Dreamcast. What was 3 through 7 or 8 going to come out on, right? Like, because the writing had to have been on the wall by that point that the Dreamcast was not in good shape, that Sega was not in good shape. Mm-hmm. Were they going to sell that to Sony? Were they going to sell that to Nintendo? Like, what would the plan? I guess, like, ultimately Microsoft got the rights, but Microsoft, with the exception of the port of 2, didn't do anything with it. So it was like, what was going to happen with the story at that point in time, Because obviously 19 years later, we finally got a third game, but it didn't really advance the story all that much.
Oh, so it doesn't end the story?
It doesn't end it. If anything, it leaves it like on another minor, I don't know if I'd say cliffhanger, but like it lets
so
you know.
So in 20 years, we might get the next one?
If we're lucky, yeah. 20 years and another $1 million Kickstarter later.
Do we know if Shenmue 3 sold well?
Like, it probably depends on who you ask. I think for the money that was invested in it, including the Kickstarter, it probably did well comparatively. But I don't know if that includes, like, do they account for digital sales? Do they account for sales that were made through the Kickstarter? I feel like that's just a very convoluted.
True. Yeah.
Like, how can you? It's kind of like TV ratings today. It's like, do you count the DVR ratings? Do you count people that watch it like after the fact or not live? Like, how do you make that determination?
I'm reading some stuff about Shenmue right now, and just to go with the detail, like the team worked with interior decorators to design more than 1,200 rooms. And they have over 300 characters with their own name, personalities, relationships. Were there any games doing this at that time? At least successfully.
We're talking about a game that predates Grand Theft Auto 3, right? So yeah. I think to most people who were alive and aware at that time, gaming has kind of what we were saying earlier about Resident Evil, how there's like Resident Evil fans before 4 and after 4. Yeah. I feel like gaming is separated by before the PS2 came out and after the PS2 came out. And I feel like if you really put cognitive thought, you'd include the Dreamcast in there somewhere, because the Dreamcast did really attribute to moving gaming forward in a positive direction. But
definitely, yeah.
You really can't tell the story of the Dreamcast without talking about the PS2. Just like you really can't tell the story about the Saturn without telling the story of the PS1 and how one greatly affected the other. Which,
right.
I mean, not to tangent too hard, but like it's kind of funny now. The community for the Sega Saturn has grown like tremendously because, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but
27.
So I'm in my 30s, right? I was alive when the Sega Saturn released in North America. I don't remember seeing it in department stores. I don't remember seeing Sega Saturn games for rent in Blockbuster. I know it existed because I read the magazines, and I knew like one kid that had a Saturn, but he just had like sports games. So I had no real reference to like what that system offered.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anybody that had one, and I obviously didn't have one. But like we're kind of just now giving the Saturn its due because, I mean, look how big the shadow of the PS1 cast, right? Like, how many people are talking about, Deep Fear, or how many people are talking about Burning Ranger or Panzer Dragoon Saga compared to how many people have talked about Final Fantasy VII?
There's some good pulls.
Yeah, but it's like fantastic games. I guess Panzer Dragoon Saga is kind of, that's kind of like a hot and cold kind of topic, but like, you're never going to be able to overshadow those games, or I'm sorry, you're never going to be able to overshadow like the Final Fantasy VII or the Resident Evil 2 or the Metal Gear Solid or
Ocarina.
All these hits that came out, yeah, like you said, on the other consoles. Like, that's the same thing with the Dreamcast. Like, we can talk for days about Shenmue, we can talk for days about Skies of Arcadia, Power Stone, but then
yeah, let's do it.
but then there's going to be this audience of like, yeah, who fucking cares? GTA 3 came out on the PS2, or Gran Turismo 2, or Final Fantasy X, right? Like,
yeah,
incredible games, fantastic games. But it's unfortunate that the audience doesn't understand that, like, we can exist with both of these things. Like, I love all those games. I don't have to, like, tribalize the fact that, I mean, I'll admit I was 100% a Dreamcast fanboy back then, and I was trying to defend it against the PS2 fans, which was futile, because how could you argue with clearly the better system? Like, I guess you could say that arguably, but let's be honest, the Dreamcast didn't have the DVD drive. It did not have these massive blockbuster hits. It just didn't have the install base, because the Saturn was such a monumental failure in North America, at least, that people probably forgot Sega existed.
Yeah, I mean, I went my whole life. I've been to a lot of people's houses, family and friends. I've met people, GameCube, 64s, PlayStations. I don't think I've ever met someone in person with a Dreamcast or a Saturn.
But what's great today, and like, if anybody hears this episode, which, like, if there's one thing you can take away, and if you're largely unfamiliar with the Saturn or the Dreamcast, or just like Sega in general, you know, the ODEs have become so much more common and user friendly, especially with these two consoles. You can go, if emulation is not your thing, right, and you can get a Dreamcast or a Saturn console, go get an ODE, right, and go get yourself a 1 terabyte gig SD card. I said 1 terabyte gig, a 1 terabyte SD card.
1 terabyte gig.
And you can go get the entire library for both of these consoles, and you can live through those yourself, right? You don't have to, because collecting physically at this point is not financially feasible for most people,
Especially for Dreamcast.
especially for the Saturn, man. Like,
Oh, man, like, all those games you listed, super expensive. Yeah, those are, I want to get to more games from those systems, actually. We did one Dreamcast game, and that was Soul Blade.
perfect, yeah.
So I want to get the other ones.
And my relationship with the Dreamcast is just like so, like, I feel so fortunate to have been able to live through that, you know, the advertising campaign, the year leading up to it, and
Yeah.
that tremendous launch that it had, and just like, I just have so many interesting stories about that era of gaming and how it was just so different than how it is today, right? Like, dude, like, just real quick, I remember, like, and I told this story to several people before. Like, I remember the first time that they had a Dreamcast set up in a kiosk at a Babbage's in the mall by me. And they had they had Phantasy Star Online, and they had a modem running in the store to show you online gaming. Because online gaming,
I bet that blew your mind.
I just couldn't wrap my head around it, because, again, I'm not a PC guy. I knew what it was. I knew it existed. I knew that I had, like, kids that I went to school with that were familiar with that. But when this guy was showing me, like, hey, you know, you're playing with other people, like, I'm literally looking on the floor, like, okay, where's the cable to this that's running to the other Dreamcast that's in the closet where there's another guy playing? Like, I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that this other person we were playing wasn't in the mall. They were not anywhere near us. They were probably not even in the same state, you know, like, and just being able to understand that, like, man, that's like the future we're headed to. And that's like so incredibly exciting. And all that starts with gaming. I think for my generation, like when I talked to my dad about when he got his first computer and when he kind of grasped what the internet was, that's very different than how I grasped it, right? Like my generation really, it was like video games and it was like file sharing for music.
Anyway,
we're in Debuita.
Yeah. And we're looking for the Chinese. So we go to this Chinese restaurant and, we asked them if they know anything about these Chinese people. They explained to us that, hey, not all Chinese are bad. And they just willingly tell us. Which, it's so weird walking up in a business and be like, hey, tell me what's going on. I mean, maybe that's like a different in Japan than it is here.
Hey, do you know any Chinese?
Imagine. Yeah. I could just imagine just walking up in a place and asking a question like that.
Yeah. And I mean, for the sake of the game, right? Like that's kind of what needed to happen. And I think, if we're talking about 1986 standards, yeah, like it was a little bit easier to strike up a conversation with a random person. And I know
people are more used to it. I mean, how you talk.
Right. Now, obviously, it's funny. Like I was actually just having this conversation with somebody the other day. Like how funny would it be if the story of Shenmue took place in 2024? Shenmue, I mean, like Rio would have been able to find Landi's location in like half a day, right? Based on his finding out on a smartphone, like where can I find sailors at the harbor?
Yep. Then over just like that. Does Shenmue 3 jump in the future at all, or does it take place right after 2?
That's what's so great about Shenmue 3. Like 19 years later, real time, but it picks up exactly where 3 leaves off. Or sorry, where 2 leaves off.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So they tell you about the 3 blades, which refer to 3 different trades: the barber, the cook, and the tailor. Because they all, deal blades. And they give you the names, and we have to go to them. But first, you run into 2 guys. They bump into you, and they're kind of assholes. This is your first little fight, but not like actual fight. Your first QTE fight. And, from my research, this game kind of helped make QTEs a thing.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. What do you think about these fights?
I think at the time I probably didn't mind them, but I remember, especially, I guess kind of now too, if I'm being honest, as I'm playing through them again, like on the remastered version, like I used to get crazy anxiety when I knew they were coming up.
Yeah.
Because it's like, kind of again what we were talking about earlier, if you failed them, you kind of had to go so far back in the game. You didn't always get to start at the beginning of that QTE, I don't think.
All right, sometimes you only have one chance to.
And sometimes, yeah, it'll just continue the story like in a different direction. So you obviously wanted you wanted to do everyone correctly.
Yeah, with that, I mean, I'll go ahead and talk about the side thing since we're talking about it. Like when you get to those kids playing soccer, and you get a QTE to catch the ball. If you don't catch it, it hits that little girl in the head, and they run away crying. I almost loaded a game, but I was like, nah, it's good for him.
Yeah, you got to see it through, man. You can't restart it.
And yeah, you take these guys out with just simple moves because they're all drunk, and you tell them not to mess with you again and leave. He's kind of a badass.
Yeah.
And I went to the tailor, and she said, okay, this kind of confused me. She says years ago she was Chinese, but not anymore. She's Japanese now. Can you do that?
Like she became a naturalized citizen?
Is that what she meant?
I guess.
I guess, yeah. I mean, it was just a weird sentence. Like, I used to be Chinese, but not anymore. But she tells you to go to the barber. And at this point, I went to the fortune teller. And it's kind of cool. You can pick gamble, future, or clue. I only did the future one, but do you know what the clue and gamble does?
That's a great question. Off the top of my head, I do not remember.
I assume clue will just give you a story hint.
So, like, if you're... Yeah, probably. That would make sense. Like, if you're going to the fortune teller you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, that's interesting you bring that up because I just never... I never used the fortune teller. And
I kind of just walked in there exploring random buildings.
Yeah, because eventually, that's how the game is. Eventually, it'll point you in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Even just talking to people off the street.
Yeah.
You'll get some info. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I was trying to find the barber I had to go to, but I accidentally went to, like, the actual barber you have to go to.
Yeah.
The wrong one, which was apparently the right one. Right. And he told me, the guy there tells you that his father just got out of the hospital, and he's the man to talk to, and he's at the park.
Yep.
And you get to him, and he tells you that Dan Lee, or Landy, is probably part of the Chinese cartel or Chinese mafia, and tells you to go see these sailors. And this is when I went to the casino for a few hours.
Yeah.
Just playing lots of slots. This is when you get challenged in the pool, where you have to sink the ball in one shot.
Yeah.
I lost a lot. Because I kept loading, and I really want to do this. And after like 4 times, I was like, okay, I'll take the L.
Have you ever played, have you ever done the billiards option in Yakuza? Like, especially the more recent ones? Dude, when it comes to, I know that I'm never going to 100% any of those games for a couple different reasons. One,
you'll go insane if you try to do that.
Yeah, like the billiards, the bowling, which the bowling is not as bad as the billiards. But then all the gambling options, the mahjong and all that.
To learn how to play shogi. And
I'm just never going to put myself through that. But yeah, like I remember the billiards in this game, which is not as unforgiving, but also still at the same time kind of frustrating. And just thinking like, I just want to play the game. Like, why do I got to do this pointless shit? What am I doing in a bar in the first place?
Right. I do like that you have the option, though.
Yeah.
You do this little thing if you enjoy it. But, if you win, he gives you some info and some money. But if you lose, you have to buy him like $1,000 drink. And I don't think you get any info, actually. You just leave. Then I went to this alley and got harassed by some drunks that, you take care of more QTs. And you head into the Heartbeats Club. And immediately you're given milk instead of alcohol. And you ask about the sailors. And a guy comes up and asks if you're a detective or something. And QTE fight. And I failed this a stupid amount of times. But the fight itself looks cool. Like you're flipping someone over the bar. And you're just easily taking these guys out like it's nothing.
Yeah. And
the bartender says, he'll tell you about the Chinese cartel if you just never show your face here again. Which you're 100% allowed to show your face there again. And he tells us to find Charlie, who deals in smuggled goods. And at this point I left. At this point, I went back home and into the day. Yeah. How does your, first few days usually go?
So there's let me see if I remember. Because I think there comes a point where you have to wait a few days, or at least several hours, until the story can progress.
Right.
And obviously, yeah, if you're on your first playthrough, you're kind of getting your feel for everything. You're not going to immediately know, I got to talk to this person to get to this person. So
plus you're still trying to figure out your way around.
Yeah, so your playthrough is very natural, whereas if I'm playing it today, I'm inevitably going to get to a point where I got to wait 24 in-game hours or whatever the fact is.
You just got progressed too far.
Yeah. And I mean, like, if you watch YouTube videos, there's guys that can complete the story in like the absolute minimum amount of time.
I kind of want to look at a speedrun of this game.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, that's an interesting topic because you can speedrun it, but the game at the same time does not consider the audience's time.
Not at all.
That game really makes you want it, for lack of a better phrase, you know, like it makes you immerse yourself in what's happening and it makes you be patient, which like I can't really think of another game, at least today, that does that. Like you could argue that most RPGs of that era are like that, the turn-based ones especially, because that's another
random
thing.
Encounter.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like, you know, you can save in the world map and you can save in at save points, but I'm thinking specifically of like certain parts of Final Fantasy VIII and certain parts of like, I don't know, Parasite Eve, where it's like, it's just very unforgiving, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how this game is. It doesn't really care if you got shit to do. It's going to tell you to wait.
Yeah. And I definitely see why some people might bounce off that.
Yeah.
And, man, it really is so damn ambitious to put that much money into this weird thing.
Put it to you like this. Like, I've been playing this game since I was 14 years old, right? So we're talking like 20 years at this point. And I have friends that I've been telling for 20 years, hey, you need to play Shenmue. And I guess they're not very good friends because I've been having to tell them this for 20 years and none of them have played it.
It's $5 right now, the remaster, 1 and 2 on Steam.
Don't get me started. But like, I guess it wasn't until recently where I kind of had this epiphany where it was like, there's no way any of them are going to like this game by today's standards because none of them have played it. The game is not particularly kind when it comes to... It's kind of what I said earlier. Like, it really is a product of its time. And yes, the remaster does consider that, and it does make things a little more friendly. But I just don't know. There was a lot of people back in 2000 that didn't like it. I got to imagine that there's even more people in 2024 that don't like it if they were playing it for the first time.
Yeah, I have 3 teenagers, and I kind of want to put them all 3 in front of Shenmue and see who like sticks it out the longest.
Yeah,
I might actually do that. But like, man, I just feel like the way people play games now is kind of different too. Like my 15-year-old was playing what was it? The Outer Worlds, and he was talking to a character in it and doesn't listen to the dialogue, kills the character, and wonders why he doesn't know where to go.
Yeah.
Man.
It's kind of like we don't really consider consequence. And like, at the sake of sounding like an old person or whatever, like we do that in our everyday lives, like outside of gaming, obviously. We've kind of lost this idea that there are consequences for our actions, or like real life consequences for our actions.
True.
But so like a good example within gaming of that is like Fallout. Fallout makes you really consider the consequence of your actions. Because if you kill this person, you're going to eliminate the possibility for X, Y, and Z, right?
Yeah, especially if Fallout 3 blow up Megaton.
Yeah, like right off the bat.
A lot of stuff you're missing out.
Exactly. But it gives you the option. Like if that's how you want to play the game. And that's why those games are so successful in their time, I feel like. Like I think Fallout 3 was a massive risk because there weren't many modern RPGs that were of that scale that offered that style of gameplay. Like Mass Effect comes to mind, was another one that was like, here's the world. go do with it what you will, right? And it doesn't matter if you choose left or right. The game will still continue as long as you want it to, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I guess in some ways, Shenmue was like that, right? Like kind of what we're talking about here. You can still arrive at your destination, but you don't have to always take the same linear path.
Yeah, or you could do something like I did, just accidentally wander into the right place.
Yeah. You can fail a QTE, or you can fail. There's parts where you can fail a battle and the story will continue, right? Like,
yeah,
it was lenient in that regard because it wanted to portray like, hey, life goes on, right? Like, we're not always going to make the right choices, but life will go on. But there are some choices that we do have to make and the game won't go on, but
yeah,
it is what it is.
Like, your life will not go on if you get knocked out by a sailor.
Right.
And this next day, this is when I ran into the kids playing soccer. And you can also run into Megumi with the kitten again, and you can name it. Yeah. And this is another cool moment I really like, even though it's just such a nothing little thing. When you first go back to, is it Dobita? That you get to the vending machine and there's a guy there. And he works, I think, at the place next door or something. And he just wants a drink, doesn't have money. So he asks you to buy him one for him.
That lazy fuck.
And, right. Do you buy him one?
I buy his lazy ass a drink every single time.
Yeah, I did too.
He asks you more than once throughout the game. Side note.
I mean, if you keep doing it,
yeah,
it works.
Quick story. That dude's brother you meet in Shenmue 2.
Okay.
They have like a little interaction where you can meet his brother, which is funny.
Oh, does he got like a snack vending machine?
No. Like, yeah, I wish that was a dialogue option. Like, hey, just so you know, your brother owes me like 5 yen or whatever the case.
Yeah. So he thanks you and heads off. Doesn't give you anything, you know. It's like, okay, guess I just did that for that guy.
And I don't think he ever mentions it again. Maybe he does, like, hey, thanks for buying me that soda, but I don't think he does. You definitely see him again, like in the restaurant.
Huh. He just has memory loss.
Yeah.
At this point, I was just kind of walking around talking to everyone. I ended up getting to this something lunches. It's a stand that sells food.
Yeah.
And she tells you that Charlie might be Yakuza and tells you about the Nagai building.
Nagai Industries.
Nagai Industries, yeah. Which is apparently full of them. And you head there. It's really weird. It's kind of guarded by this one guy. And you feel like he's going to stop you, but you kind of just walk in. You walk into an office with like 3 guys. 2 of them are like, why the fuck are you talking to me? And one of them just gives you the info you asked for.
Yeah, and then that guy, I think it's the guy sitting at the desk, he gives you like that strange encouragement or whatever. That's a good answer, kid.
Yeah. It's so weird.
Aren't you supposed to be a part of the Japanese mafia?
Yeah.
Maybe they're trying to recruit. I don't know.
Maybe. And they tell you that to, I think they say he's on the jacket shops. I don't remember.
So I think from there, you're supposed to go see that guy that gives tattoos in that apartment, if I remember correctly. Because that's when you got to wait like a day. Because I think I got to wait to get into Nagai Industries, and then I think I have to wait another day to go see that guy that tattoos in the apartment. Have you been to that point yet?
Yeah, but before that, I got some clues that say like Charlie will be around this certain area around 7 p.m.
Yeah.
I think it was by the arcade, maybe?
Yeah, okay. But then you end up fighting those 2 sailors in the parking lot?
Yeah, because they're the guys you beat up earlier, and they like ambush you in this parking lot. Yeah, and then you do like your actual first fight.
Yeah.
And it's a 5-on-1, 5v1. What do you think about the combat in this game?
So just, like thinking about how from conception, this whole game started as like a, Yusan wanted to do an RPG, and the initial build was based off of Akira from Virtua Fighter, and how it was going to be his story, and it was going to be, like the combat to a degree resembles the combat from Virtua Fighter in a lot of ways. So it's, I understand the translation, and I even remember thinking back when I was playing it, like, this is basically an RPG because you're not just fighting people the entire game, but I think in a way it makes the battle and the combat that much more enjoyable because there's not that many battles throughout the game, if we're being honest.
Yeah, I just think the animation for the combat is just amazing.
Yeah.
And I know before this, I went to the park and I learned that double blow move.
Yeah.
And, I actually use that here. Pretty helpful.
So that was going to be my next question to you, was like, when you have fought, are you using those moves that you've learned, or are you just like doing a crazy punch and kick combination and whatever happens?
Oh, no, I use the moves that I learned.
I'm going in there like drunken master, just like whatever.
I'll do that too.
Whatever button combinations I pull off, that's what happens. It's not until I get like low health that I start trying to like strategically take those out.
But yeah, I mean that double blow, it's so good for getting people off you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you take one of the guys and you start twisting his arm until he tells you that Charlie hangs out around a tattoo parlor, which is a secret parlor in an apartment complex. And yeah, you have to head to this apartment complex by the bars, and you just, not that secret. It has a sign on the door. You walk in there, and the guy here says he'll tell you about Charlie if you let him give you free tattoos because of your skin. It's like not saggy and perfect.
Yeah.
And he just wants to use you. You end up saying no like 4 times. And he eventually tells you that he might be here tomorrow. And you head off. And yeah, I ended my day at this point and went to bed. No, I didn't end my day. It got to the end of the day. And it teleported me back to my room. Did that happen in the original?
Yeah, so like it'll give you that little warning, like, oh, it's 9 p.m. or whatever, I should get home. But you can continue for like another hour or two. I think it's at 11 or maybe even midnight, but I think it's at 11 when it forces you to go back home. And there is no like detriment to doing that. The next day, Ine-san will be like, could you please get home at a more reasonable hour? But it's like, okay, lady, just give me my fucking allowance. Like,
right.
But there is no detriment of doing that as many times as you want.
Yeah, it's like, why are you giving me a bedtime? Get out of here.
Right. The lady's on death's door, and she's telling me to be home at a reasonable hour.
Yeah. Well, she's looking out for you. You might catch a cold or something.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good place to stop it for now.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I really enjoyed talking about Shenmue with you.
I did, yeah. It's always really fun kind of reliving these moments with like other gamers, and especially, people that weren't necessarily there from day one, but still have an affinity and appreciation for the art.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, I would really recommend, if you're largely unfamiliar with the Dreamcast and its library, like there is such a depth of quality. And if you like Shenmue, chances are you're going to like a lot of other stuff on there.
Right. Yeah, I'm probably going to bring up a big list of Dreamcast games and see what I want to do after Shenmue and Shenmue 2.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you guys for listening. Hope y'all enjoyed.
Take care.
Peace.